as a veteran of several 3-hour plus movies that suddenly seem to be the running time of so many movies, they've forgotten. You can tell a great story in 98 minutes if...
Yeah, and some of my favorite films, don't get me wrong, some of my favorite films are extremely long and over 3 hours. I will say, since being a parent of young children, I really need a shorter movie. I've just lost my patience. I'm just like, let's go, people.
It would be better to stay and fight than leave.
Do you really mean that you want to stay and not fight? Because when was the last time you had the strength to stand up to the aggression of Klaus, to protect your children or to get out of harm's way?
You to tell me what kind of wife and mother to be when you are neither one yourself. You are a spinster, a whore, an unwed mother.
Stop. Ono was made unconscious and raped like the rest of us. How dare you call her a whore? Riki, are you not afraid that your own sweet boys will become monsters like their father because you do nothing to protect them?
Stop it.
Nothing to educate them, nothing to teach them the horror of their father's ways.
I have heard enough. You women realize we are talking about leaving. We are a large group. Many things could go wrong, and time is fleeting. For the love of our Lord Jesus Christ and precious Savior, shut your pie holes, please.
How dare you pass judgment on me?
It wasn't a judgment, it was a question.
Welcome to Behind the Lens. Today she is once again an Academy Award nominee for Best Adapted Screenplay, and her film is a nominee for Best Picture as well, and it should have had a few more in my opinion, but those are not bad, and been acclaimed since it premiered at Telluride. Welcome, Sarah Polley.
Thank you for having me.
Director, writer of Women Talking, and you know her so well as an actress too in so many things, but not, I don't think since 2010 have you gone before the camera.
Yeah, it's been a long
But
time.
I don't recall you ever saying, I'm never going to act again.
No, I don't think I did. I just got more interested in making my own films, and you know, I think I had, I had some great experiences as an actor, but I had enough negative experiences, especially in that last couple of years, that I just thought, I don't know, I guess it's worth it. And I really love, and then making films takes so much time that ultimately you're just not really available. So that just became a focus. I don't think it's a lifelong commitment to not act. It's just hasn't been my focus.
And you're not one of those directors that wants to direct yourself?
No. I don't know how people, I'm amazed by people who can do it. And some people do it really well, but I can't imagine.
Yeah, doing that.
Yeah.
I would imagine that's a huge challenge, to take on all of that.
I would think so, yeah. I mean, maybe one day when I'm a much more experienced filmmaker, but I'm certainly not there yet.
Yeah. Well, you're becoming a very experienced filmmaker, and we were just talking before we started this about Away From Her. That was your first feature film with Julie Christie. I knew you had an in with her because you'd worked as an actor together with her.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
And I'd worked with her twice as an actor, actually, and I just connected with her so deeply. And I remember once I was working with her in Iceland on a Hal Hartley movie, and on the way home, I picked up the New Yorker, and there was the story by Alice Munro that The Bear Came Over the Mountain that Away From Her is based on. Yeah. And so I just saw Julie's face and just wrote it for her.
And you went in it. Did you feel prepared at that point to take on a feature film? Because you'd done shorts and things. And, were you confident of all those years in front of the camera, working with all kinds of directors, men and women, interestingly enough, that you learned enough that you thought?
I definitely didn't feel ready. And I think the thing I'm learning more and more is you shouldn't feel ready, or you're probably not challenging yourself. Yeah. Whatever you're doing, however far you are in your career. So no, I felt completely unprepared. I felt like an imposter. I felt like everyone's going to figure out that I had no idea what I was doing. And I realized that's just a feeling that follows you around generally in life if you're a self-aware person. Because I think, like 4 films in, I didn't feel differently. I think what I'm defining for myself now is that everyone feels like that on some level. And the only difference between some people and other people is there are people who do it anyway, alongside that anxiety, and other people who it stops them. And so I've just sort of made a decision to live alongside that feeling and not let it get too loud.
Don't actors have that all the time, that they think they're going to be found out? I always think I'm going to be found out when I get up in the morning, Yeah. It's such a human trait that,
Yeah.
That level of insecurity.
And I think it's not, you know, I think it goes hand in hand with like probably the thing that keeps us from getting too arrogant, which isn't such a bad thing, but it can get out of control. So it's about titrating it, making sure it's reasonable. There's a great actor in my film, I won't name them, but a very successful actor who told us this great story about how every part that they've ever had, there's been a moment where they've written a long email to their agent telling them why they need to get out of them because they'll do a terrible job.
Oh my
and they
God.
realize they're not the right person for the part for every job this actor has ever had. So we were reading all the old emails. Like every single amazing part this person has played. And it's like one of the best actors ever.
Oh my God.
You know, and so it's just, I think that is, you know, part of what makes us human. And again, I just think there's a difference between listening to that feeling and doing things anyway.
Yeah, you know, I just interviewed Huey Kwan, who's wonderful in Everything Everywhere and winning all kinds of awards and things, but hadn't acted in 30 years, had gone behind the scenes and, you know, and was so insecure about it that he got that job and he didn't tell his family. Only his wife knew and his lawyer, who was a co-star in The Goonies when he was a kid star. He was a kid star like you, and it was a different thing. He didn't tell him until the trailer was about to drop the next day.
God.
And he was so convinced he was going to be fired in the first week. He didn't want to disappoint anybody.
How amazing.
Isn't that something?
And he's so great in that movie.
You know, I may go back to his early success, you know, as a child actor and then, you know, sort of feeling he lost it and things.
Yeah.
You know, and you had that experience as a child actor. You started at what, 4 or 5?
Yeah, I think I was 5, yeah.
So you were almost born into this business.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, it's, I mean, the most familiar place for me to be is on a film set.
Is on a film set.
Yeah.
And that helps as a director, as the person running the show here, right?
Yes and no. I think it's great in the sense that you really know the environment and, you know, actually growing up listening to crews complain your whole life is actually good because you kind of know how to avoid a really unhappy work environment. But you're also kind of too aware almost, and you've heard people talking about directors not knowing what they're doing or things that irritate people, and so you kind of take that with you as well as this other voice. So it's good and bad.
Wow. You know, I was looking at your list of awards over the years, and there was one that really struck me as amusing. From the Alliance of Women Journalists, you won the award as the best leap from acting to directing. There's an actual award, the best leap from acting to directing.
Yes. Yeah. I remember.
So congratulations
Thank
on that. And it's certainly on display here with Women Talking. I saw it in Telluride. You know, they were holding it back. They didn't show it to anybody before there. And I'm so glad about that because the communal experience that I had, and particularly my wife, watching it was in tears through the whole thing. And she wants me to tell you every time I see you, you were in Palm Springs and I was going to, I did sit at your table, please tell her what that meant to me.
Nice.
You know, it's not just for women. There's a lot of jokes that we've heard on the award shows and things. A movie called Women Talking. I think this is so important for men to see.
Yeah, in the same way that I think 12 Angry Men is a really important movie for women to see. I think that
Exactly.
Obviously we should be interested in conversations. And ultimately, I think that the issues in Women Talking are universal. I think that they apply to so many people of all genders. I don't think it's actually that gendered a movie. And I don't think it's even a sort of post-Me Too movie. Like, to me, this is a very timeless story.
To me, it's about a subject that's very much in the news all the time, democracy.
Yes, exactly.
And that is for, this should be shown in front of Congress right now after what I've witnessed on the State of the Union speech and everything else, that who thought democracy would be controversial?
Yeah.
But this movie puts it on such a smaller human level.
Yeah, and that was one of the things that excited me the most about this film, is the idea of showing this act of radical democracy in which people who don't agree with each other on every single issue actually work together, find consensus, and move forward. Because it's something we are seeing less and less of. We are all in our corners, shaking our narratives at each other, getting more and more rigid about them, finding our teams.
Right.
And there's so little tolerance in terms of being able to sit with someone in the discomfort of disagreement and move through it. And I think that's, to me, it's just such an important part of us as human beings and our abilities as empathetic creatures to be able to do that. And I do think we are losing some of that ability. And so I think for me, it was just this tremendously hopeful thing to see this group of women have to hash something out and come to a way forward.
Exactly. That's exactly it. And you know, you're right. We have lost it. We all watch the news the way we want to watch it, on whatever we agree with now. It's just a different time. This story is actually based on something that happened in Bolivia, from the book that came out in 2018, I think in 2010 or something.
Yeah, in the early 2000s over a course of years.
And it's interesting that it's recent times, but it's almost a period piece too.
Yeah, so I mean, it's based on Miriam Toews' novel, Women Talking. Miriam is Mennonite and wrote this book about a Mennonite community in Bolivia in the early 2000s in which this series of attacks took place over many years. And the jumping off point where it becomes fiction is where the women gather in this hayloft and have this vote and decide what to do next. That's fictionalized. But the attacks themselves, the book was a response to those attacks and Miriam's reading of that case. So it's just an interesting thing because she's created this scenario in which these women decide to sort of wrestle agency over the future of their community.
Yeah, which is fascinating. And, you know, in reading the book, did you just sort of discover I know Frances McDormand, who's obviously in the movie, but also a founding producer of it, basically, had read it too. But how did you come upon this? So
I read it and I fell in love with it, and I literally came up in my Twitter feed 2 days later that Dee Dee Gardner and Frances McDormand had the rights to the book. And so I reached out to them, and the exact same day they reached out to me. So I felt this incredibly meant to be thing.
Symmetry, like, wow, meant to be.
Yeah.
That's
really, really amazing. And the whole thing has felt like that. The whole thing has felt very charmed and strange coincidences and this very streamlined, beautiful, kind of fast process.
The minute I watched this movie, and I've said it a million times to people whenever I talk about it, it felt Hitchcockian to me in a lot of ways. You know, the suspense, the way it was shot, having the camera peer outside, but not, you know, it's just there. The changing, the lighting, all of that going into it. It's so cinematic.
Oh, thank you so much.
And, you know, that's not easy in a barn.
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of thinking about that, about how do we make this cinematic, and if this isn't a play, why not? And so how do we kind of look at this cinematically? And to me, it did feel like I really wanted to approach it through the filter of another time in filmmaking, of a kind of classic time in filmmaking.
Absolutely.
And an epic sense of things that these women are literally talking about breaking apart one world and building another. So let's embrace that. Like, let's not shy away from the gravity of that at any given moment. Let's make the camera movement intentional and muscular and have a trajectory to that as well. So sort of designing that was really interesting because it's subtle, but it's so important that it felt like it could move.
And of course it is urgency. There's time, there's a ticking clock here, there's all of that that's shown very cleverly, although you don't necessarily want people to notice it, but you do see the change of day and everything as time moves on, and they've got 48 hours basically to change their lives or accept where they are.
Basically all of our tension and all of our ticking clock comes from the movement of that sun. So we have to be incredibly aware of it and aware of the impact of shadow and light. So yeah, the work with Luc Montpellier, my director of photography, and we spent months just sort of thinking about and talking about the trajectory of the sun and the camera's movement around
That's really interesting, you know, how, you know, all those things that go in to making this story work on film, you know, as opposed to a play. You could, if you want to dismiss it, you say, well, this could be a play, they're just talking. That is so dismissive because that's not what this is. And when I say Hitchcock to people, they go, really? Psycho? No. Hitchcock did this kind of stuff. You know, Rope. Look at Rope.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Look at
And also, how do you maximize tension in every moment? So one of the things that I got really obsessed with early on was how do we make sure every scene has 2 to 3 functions?
Right.
Because if it only has one, we are going to feel some of the tension drop, that we have to keep it taut. Also, the film had to move fast. Like, this film could not have survived, you know, 2.5 hours. I was really concerned that it moved like the book did. It moved like a bullet. It was efficient. It didn't repeat itself. So just the idea of creating that tension and making sure we didn't drop that thread was really important.
I would imagine the casting process here would have been really difficult because, first of all, they all have to be available all the time.
Yeah.
It's not like you can shoot somebody and be out in a week.
Yeah, and it was interesting because it naturally sort of produced this group of people who were interested in that, right? It's a certain kind of person who's interested in giving up their entire summer as a very successful actor to basically be part of this theater camp for not a ton of money, where you're basically sitting off camera for 3 and 4 days at a time, going full tilt for your fellow actors.
Yeah.
There were no trailers. People were in a green room together. It was a certain kind of egoless personality that the film attracted, which made for this incredible company of people. It really felt like this theater company of people who were so collaborative and so willing to make space for each other. It was really a very unique experience in terms of that group of people.
How did you get them? Were you very zeroing in on certain people or matching them, or how did you do that? Because it's not easy.
Yeah, it really was a puzzle. My casting director is my brother, John Buchan, and so we worked for months. Usually when I have a first draft of a script, I send it to him, and then he spends time educating me on, like, here are the people who you need to watch every one of their films. Like, let's just get to know people.
Right.
So I really got to know the actors in that age range who would be appropriate for all of the parts. I had really long, intensive meetings with people. A lot of it was figuring out, if this person plays Marieke, then that person can't play Ona. If this person plays Ona, that person can't play Salome, and moving them around.
Yeah.
So I think I knew early on I wanted Rooney to be part of the film, but I had imagined her as Marieke, or I imagined her as Salome, and then eventually realized she was an Ona. I met Claire Foy as Ona. Realized in halfway through that meeting, no, she's Salome.
Right.
I met Jessie Buckley, not sure if she was Ona or Marieke. So, things moved around. It had a lot to do with who the actors gravitated towards, and then also how I felt they would work together. So you couldn't cast one person until you cast all 12, and that was the biggest challenge of it.
To me, it's nominated also for SAG Award for cast, for ensemble, and I wish the Oscars had that. I keep suggesting it to them, because there's movies that come along that are like this, where you don't want to separate anybody out of it. And I think in a weird way, that's why it didn't get acting nominations, because it's almost impossible to do.
Yeah.
There's so many ways you could go in casting a Democratic ballot or something, that it needs to be the whole ensemble working together.
Yeah, and in the spirit of this film, which was such a collective and where people were so dependent on each other, it would have almost felt strange for one person to be singled out. I mean, of course, I wish they all could be honored for their amazing work, but an ensemble award would be, I mean, I think everyone's just so thrilled about that SAG nomination, to just feel that everyone's work is being honored.
It's so appropriate on this. There are gaps of years between your films here. Does it take you a long time to decide, okay, I want to spend 2 years or whatever it's going to take from start to go to?
It does. I feel like I have to feel urgent about it. I don't want to make films ever just for the sake of making films. There's a lot of movies in the world. I want to make sure that I feel like it's something that, first of all, that hasn't been made before, and that I specifically have something to say through that film. I also have 3 little kids, so to me it felt impossible to juggle film hours with being a present parent. So also finding the right producers like Frances McDormand and Dee Dee Gardner, who would say, absolutely, we can work shorter working hours, you can be home to see your kids. That was a huge impetus for me to be able to come back to filmmaking.
And that's good. There's been a lot of talk this year. Every time we get a set of nominations, no women directors were nominated. DJ, you should have been, and so should have a number of women with films this year, and it seems a shame. I don't know, are we progressing, are we going backwards? The last 2 years have been female filmmakers actually winning Oscars. I don't know, what is going on here?
I mean, I have to separate myself from my total delight at the recognition our film has had, which is very real and authentic, and I'm just so thrilled by that. So that's my main takeaway is, I'm so happy for the people who worked on our film that it got that recognition. I will say that there were films this year like Till and The Woman King and Saint Omer that I would have personally loved to see a lot more recognition of, and that I think it deserved it hugely. And so,
because those 3 you mentioned got 0 Oscar nominations.
And that to me is bewildering. They were just such beautiful films, and I think people at the top of their game in terms of the work that was being done. So I do think about that. I definitely wish there'd been more than one spot for a woman in the Best Picture. You know, those films will have long shelf lives and they're amazing, but it does have an impact. I'm seeing it with our own film. When something gets nominated, it has a huge impact on the life of that film. And obviously, I just wish that some of the women I've grown to really know and love through this process and who made brilliant films this year were also beneficiaries of that.
Yeah.
I will say, I do think history is these short periods of reform followed by long periods of reaction, and it is possible there's been a moment of people saying, okay, we did that equity thing, but we're a bit bored now, so I think we're just going to go back to where we were. And I do feel like, I mean, that's the concern. I think you'll probably get a better sense next year and the year after if this is a trend or if it was, just this year. But I certainly would have liked to see Gina and Shinoya and, Alice and a lot of the other amazing filmmakers who made films this year get more recognition.
Yeah, that's for sure. There was a time when any movie directed by a woman, the whole future of movies directed by women in studios depended on the success of that movie.
Yeah.
I think we've moved beyond that, but I got to tell you, it's an embarrassment of riches of what we've seen this year alone that should have been recognized for sure.
Yeah.
You're in the adapted screenplay, and I always think that's a real trick to please the author. And did you work directly with Miriam at all, or
I did a little bit in terms of at the very beginning. So I always like to sit with an author if they will and ask them every question I've ever wanted to know about the novel, which is as a reader, which I kind of think that's what I am first and foremost in this world as a reader.
Right.
To get to do that with an author you love is really the great joy of life. To get to walk around inside a book with the person who wrote it. Yeah. So I met with Miriam for a long time beforehand. And then I went away and did it. And then I think, once I had a draft I was happy with, I showed it to her. I showed her when I got really close to casting people. I involved her. It was really important to me that the film make you feel like the book without being overly literal to the book, which I think is actually a really good way to betray a book, is to be so close literally to it that you can't capture the feeling of it. So for me, it was about capturing the spirit of the book more than anything.
And I think in the changes, you made a key change that works. It was fine in the book, but it works really well in the film, is the narrator.
Oh, cool.
Putting the youngest woman there, girl, as the narrator, as opposed to the character of August, of Ben Wishaw's character.
Yeah.
Was that what went through your head in making that change?
So in the book, I loved the way the male narrator worked. It's, I think, almost a radical act that she gives the narration to a man, and it works beautifully, I think.
Right.
And I thought it would work really beautifully in the screenplay. And then as we went through the process, we realized more and more it was creating a distance between us and our experience as the audience. And for me, I started to realize that we needed the immediacy of that feeling of hearing the voice through one of the women who had actually experienced it. So that was a really interesting collaborative decision that happened. It was kind of brainstorming session with me and Dee Dee Gardner and Chris Donaldson, our editor, and just sort of thinking about how can we get ourselves closer and closer to the emotional life of this film. And I had become obsessed with Kate Hallett, the young actor who plays Auche. And so the idea of being able to center her more and hear it through her voice and just try to capture her wisdom and her sense of honesty and her acute powers of observation in that narration. And writing that narration was a really big deal for me, to sort of go back to what it is to be 16 and processing an experience like this.
And ultimately, it gives you a sense of hope, the future.
Yeah.
By putting it in the hands of that particular
Exactly.
character.
No, exactly. I think for me that was so interesting. Is suddenly there's a world after this one.
Right.
Even if it's just subliminal and you're not totally aware of the context of the narration, it gives you a sense there's something else after this.
Yeah, and you really feel it without, the unseen in this movie is so felt and so much more effective than all of these super violent movies and things that I go through that feel you have to show it. This was as chilling as any of those times 10.
Oh, thank you. Well, it is a Hitchcock thing of when you're not seeing something, it is so much more horrifying. And in this case, it's not even what the film's about. Like, this is the background of these horrible events, but actually what's important is how are these people moving alongside that? Yeah. How do they move as a community through it together? It's not about the horror.
Yeah, the effect of it. It's really extraordinary. Well, We could keep talking about women talking, but I've run out of time. But congratulations on
so
this.
much.
And this is a movie, like I said, everyone should see for many reasons. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.